I'm really proud to have you on our screen, and I'm really happy to talk to you. Even though I heard that you're not really aware of what we're going to talk about, I think you got the answers. I'm absolutely sure about that. The thing that we're going to talk about is alliances, and how do you work with alliances? How do they shape your core business? Where do they hinder you? Where do they empower you? I have here on our screens Monica Rossi, Sustainable Manager from Lavazza. I have Saskia Brösten from Yunus Social Business and Margarete Kim from The Gold Standard. You are internationally well known, but I suppose that some of our German listeners don't really know what you're about and what your business is about. So I would like to spend the first couple of minutes just by you telling us what you actually do. I think the easiest part of this is Veronica Rossi. Everybody knows Lavazza and knows what the products are. But what's your job there?
Hello, everybody. Guten Morgen. It's really an honor to be here with all of you. Yes, as you say, probably everybody knows what Lavazza is a coffee roasting company since 127 years. So we are quite old. Lavazza basically is a surname, the surname of the family owning the company. So maybe this is something not everybody knows. And I am coordinating the sustainability department. Within Lavazza, we have a department within the finance and corporate affairs division. And I am coordinating this. And within the sustainability department, we work on both assessing the environmental impacts of Lavazza, trying to set strategies on social and environmental sustainability actions. And we also coordinate the work of Lavazza Foundation all over the world, with which we work with the coffee growing communities in 20 countries around the globe. So I have the honor and pleasure to coordinate all these amazing activities.
Thank you so much. Maybe it's Saskia, you can just take over. What is your business about? It's probably a bit more complicated to explain than the Lavazza.
Exactly. Well, it's unfortunately only a little bit in coffee. We do have a couple of social businesses in the coffee space. So I'll move on first. So over a decade ago, I co-founded Yunus Social Business together with Mohammed Yunus, because not everyone knows who or what Yunus is. And Mohammed Yunus won the Peace Nobel Prize in 2006 because he invented and practiced the idea of microcredit in Bangladesh and around the world. Microcredits are small loans for poor women to help them get out of poverty. And that's what he won that prize for. And we now, over a decade ago, co-founded Yunus Social Business to actually expand the model of social business, and microfinance is one of them, around the world. And so social businesses are companies that are 100% focused on solving social or environmental problems, but doing it in a business way. So basically, we're turning around what business is all about, namely not only to make profit for shareholders, but to actually instead solve real world problems for people and the planet. And we do that by, one, investing in those types of companies in India, in East Africa, and Latin America. And two, we help global corporations, so the Lavazzas of this world, to actually see how they can improve their actual core business through building new social business models, or perhaps also, for example, sourcing their products and services from social businesses. So that's what we do. And maybe one additional disclaimer, obviously my focus and the focus of Yunus Social Business over the last decade have been on poverty alleviation. So that's been our main lens. But as you all know, poverty and the climate change are incredibly interlinked. So as climate change happens, people in the global south also need to adapt to the climate change, A. And B, of course, as population in the global south are growing significantly, of course, they will be the next ones to contribute significantly to climate change. So how can we prevent some of those emissions from happening? So that's why the work that we're doing with poverty and climate change is extremely interlinked. And that's why I think that's the perspective that I can add.
Thank you.
So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and thank you for being here. And thank you for reminding me that the whole day is about climate and facing the climate crisis. This is what you are part of and what our conversation is also part of. Maybe you could just briefly tell us the idea of a social business. I don't think that everybody is aware of that, of what that really is.
Yeah. So to make it very concrete, a social business, again, is a company that just generate revenues to cover costs, but it is focused on solving a social problem. To name a very simple example, an entrepreneur in Uganda said he wanted to solve the problem of lack of access to clean drinking water, because not everyone in Uganda has clean drinking water. As a matter of fact, 10 million people don't have clean drinking water of 40 million people living there. So he said, I want to solve that problem. So he designed a product, a solution of like a water cleaning system that he started selling at schools about 5-6 years ago. We lent him about 250,000 as a loan for him to be able to grow this particular business. This money he's actually repaid to us. And meanwhile, he's not only provided clean drinking water to over 1 million people in Uganda, but also in neighboring countries, in Kenya and other countries, in total now 13 million people. So a social business is a business that, again, is profitable, but it solves social problems. And that's the key differentiator. So to add one additional component, if now this company wants to grow, they won't just think, okay, I've done schools, now I'm going to go to businesses because that's where I can sell more water and therefore make more money. But they will think, how can I lower the price of my system so even people in more remote areas would have access to that clean drinking water? So that's the difference between a social business and a normal business. A social business optimizes for solving the problem, and a normal business, traditionally at least, would optimize for how can they make more profit for the shareholders. That would be the typical old way of looking at business. So that's the fundamental difference.
Thank you.
I hope that helped.
Yeah, it helps a lot. I have a lot of questions more to ask you, but I would first like to get my...
I'm here for the next 40 minutes,
Good.
You know.
I won't let you go before you have answered at least half of them.
Okay, good.
Margarethe, what are you about?
Thank you for having me here, and it's a great pleasure to join Veronica and Saskia in this discussion. So I'm the CEO of Gold Standard, and for those of you who may not be familiar with Gold Standard, we're a Swiss-based NGO and a standard that's all about managing, measuring, and maximizing impact in a credible and transparent way. We were established 20 years ago by WWF and like-minded NGOs to, at the time, ensure environmental integrity and sustainable development impact in the carbon markets. And over the years, we've worked with more than 2,000 projects in more than 80 countries to drive positive impact on the ground. And recently, in the last few years, we have expanded our standards application to drive credible impact in sustainable finance, increasingly working with companies. Veronica will probably speak more to that, and also sustainable finance investors and financial sector players to ensure that their investment, their interventions create maximized impact on the ground. So all the great work done by Veronica and Saskia, how do we translate that into credible, tangible impact claim is something that we play a role in.
So could you just give me an example so that I can better understand what you're about?
So, for example, we work with 4 different stakeholder groups. One is governments. So as you know, under the theme of climate change, all the governments are pledging under the Paris Agreement, so they have national targets. And in order to get there, they need the right policies, they need the right mechanisms, they need the right finance to achieve those targets. And one of the mechanisms they use is a global carbon market mechanism, which is in Article 6 under the Paris Agreement. So for example, what is a proper way of making that a transaction between countries on the carbon reduction outcome? Mm-hmm. So what's the requirement? How should the projects be designed, and who certifies and verifies that outcome? So we play a role in working with governments in driving that ambition. We also work with corporates. For example, Veronica will very much know the complexity of supply chain. So how do you allocate your carbon emission reduction and drive your sustainability agenda and your efforts towards net zero targets? So you need a lot of tools and guidances to make sense of that. So Gold Standard plays a role in supporting that. And also in the carbon markets, for example, we certify and verify carbon credits. So carbon credits are used in voluntary sense as well as compliance for governments and certain industries. So we work with various stakeholders in basically verifying and helping them to drive maximum impact.
Why would one need a private organization? Isn't this a job that governments needed to do? Just give credibility to standards?
So it's not so, and that's why we're going to be talking about cooperation, because it's not something that one stakeholder group can do. And climate change is such a complex topic that every part of the global community has a role to play. And for example, Gold Standard, we're an NGO. So we have a role to play in driving that advocacy, putting the right best practices and showcasing what that best practices mean for government, corporates, and investors.
So let's get Lavazza in. Just let us make a case. Lavazza wants to get climate neutral by, let's be ambitious, 2030. And then they would come to you and they would tell you, we are going to do A, B, Z. And then you would say, this is credible or not. That's the way it works?
That's a very high level of where we can add value. Of course, we can't say this is right or wrong for everything Lavazza does, but for certainly Scope 3 interventions, which is the supply chain of Lavazza, we can work with Lavazza and its suppliers and various sort of commodity platforms to understand the carbon emission reduction attached to the products or attached to the supplies. And then how that counts towards their net zero target is something that we can provide support.
Let's get Veronica in here. How do you use alliances?
Yeah, thank you, Petra. I just wanted to jump in because, well, first of all, we already have some kind of partnerships with Gold Standard. We consider it one of the highest standards in the carbon credits market, and we use it basically. And we think it's really important to have this triple approach: measure, reduce, offset. You need to measure your environmental impacts in a credible way with a standard methodology, and in this area, partnerships are necessary. Partnership between governments, NGOs, regulatory bodies, institutions, and companies, in order to understand what methodology to use to then reduce what you can reduce and then offset what is remaining to have the factory on, basically. And it's really important to work together with all the stakeholders, because as Margaret was saying, climate change is really complex because it entails, well, everything in the supply chain, I would say the value chain, because climate change is affecting and involving both the consumers and the producers and in between all the other actors. So we need to work all together to do this. And well, Lavazza has been working it's been believing in partnerships, public-private partnerships since 20 years, I would say also 30 already, because we actually set up our first sustainability projects in 1998, because the first Tierra project, which now is a product, began in 1998. And in 2001, we set up the first alliance of coffee roasting companies. It's called International Coffee Partners, and actually is coordinated by a German foundation, the Ernst Neumann Stiftung, based in Hamburg. And it is an alliance of 7 family-owned coffee roasters, which, again, since 2001, have been financing, supporting sustainability projects all over the world. Now we have been activating more than 50 projects with thousands and thousands of farmers involved. And what's really key is that since the beginning, we worked with governments, especially the GIZ, the International Cooperation Agency of the German government, the Austrian Development Agency, the Sweden Development Agencies have been working together with this alliance in order to progress on impacts and change on the ground. And together with this alliance, we also set up in 2010 the Coffee and Climate Initiative, which is, again, a platform where we have NGOs, government, roasters, producers, organization, which started in 2010 with the aim of studying what's climate change on coffee, what's happening in coffee with climate change. And we set up a set of scientific research to understand what was happening, and what was happening was quite important because we risk to lose 30% of suitable coffee land in like 20 years if climate change is not halted. And so this organization studied the effect and then developed on-ground methodologies, very simple agricultural practices to be applied by the small group of farmers all over the world to be resilient to climate change, because we need policies, high-level decisions, but we also need producers on the ground very remotely in Colombia or in Ethiopia to have practical tools to deal with climate change on a daily basis. And to do this, we need partnerships to go back, you know? So it's really important.
It's fascinating to listen to you. At the same time, for me as a journalist, I also have to play the devil's advocate. This sounds also smooth and so easy. And apparently in the real world, it is not. There's a lot of suspicion. We very often get these kind of questions in too, which reminds me to remind our listeners, you can send me questions, that all this is basically about greenwashing for business. That you use the alliances to actually not really become green, but to pretend that you're green. What do you say to these kind of questions?
Well, I think it's basically the contrary, in my opinion, because when you get inside your company, NGOs like, you know, Save the Children, Oxfam, coming into the company, looking at your policies and challenging you every day, it's quite, you know, it gets you busy. Because what I learned in working, I've been working 8 years in Lavazza, is that you need to listen to NGOs, especially those big NGOs who are so committed. They were at the beginning quite suspicious in starting to work with companies. But once they start, it's because they trust you, and you need to open the doors and you need to work. Otherwise, the risk is too high for you. So it's really important to work with serious NGOs, and we try to do that and opening the doors and do what they suggest you to do. Otherwise, there's a big risk.
Kim? Yeah?
Just on greenwashing, I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of the corporates come to us to partner with Gold Standard, as well as a lot of investors recently, is because, for example, our standard is applied in carbon markets, but following Gold Standard safeguards and requirements, for example, project developers need to conduct local consultation, design the project to track minimum 3 sustainable development goals, whether that's a biodiversity loss, improved livelihood, increased water access, improved education. So these are not fluffy terms or greenwashing, but really measured with credible evidence, data, and a third-party audit. So corporates are more and more finding it useful, although it's more complex and costly, find it useful to partner with standards like Gold Standard to go through that process to ensure that that impact is not greenwashing, or those claims are not used or subject to greenwashing allegations.
So what I get from you is that actually you would suggest that, I get you in, Saskia, right in a moment, that people that consumers don't look at the company and what the company says, but also looks at the organizations that are that check the companies. So not just look at Lavazza, but also look at who's Lavazza working with, which then increases the credibility. Saskia, before I let you come in, let me ask you an additional question. If I got you right, your argument is, as long as we have regular business whose job it is to make as much profit as possible, we can only change the world to a certain extent. So in the end, it would be good if every company would be a social business like yours? Or is it overstating it?
Well, I think that, that may be an ideal world in that sense, for sure. But I'm also a realist. I myself come from the dark side in the sense that I was a management consultant at the beginning of my career, and now over a decade did, of course, move into social business. So I know that that world is a very strong world. It's probably, the strongest force in our society, the economy. And what I've definitely seen over the last decade that I've been in the social business sector is that the normal old school economy is slowly but surely also moving into that direction of trying to also at least incorporate social and environmental topics. I've definitely seen a move. So, if I started at the beginning, corporates were like, social business, what? No, that's philanthropy and this is business. Let's keep things apart. And now companies are coming around and understanding those topics much more. So would it be perhaps would it be ideal to eventually have a world where business only does things that are good for people and the planet? My answer would be probably yes. Are we going to get there anytime soon? My realistic answer is probably no. But we have to push the envelope further, that we actually get there step by step. Let's put it this way. At least we need to move from companies harming people and the planet, which is the situation that we're in now, to a point where companies are sort of net positive for people and the planet, meaning that they are not adding any more CO2 emissions to this world, but they're sort of net zero, as that is called. Plus, of course, also on the people side, that they don't exploit people, paying them terrible wages, child labor, and those kinds of things, to a point where actually they are a net contributor and actually ensure that everyone has a living wage. So I think those are the things that we need to first move the economy to, so that they're not harming the world anymore. And then we can, in parallel already, start making sure that business actually has a positive impact, which many companies already do, by the way, right? I'm just still saying there's a lot of the harming stuff still happening. But to make some concrete examples on that, and I hope I'm not speaking too fast, Petra, but just to name a couple of examples. I've seen that corporates want to change. And I don't know the Lavazza case so well, Veronica, but we will meet soon, and then I'll understand your case better as well. Companies want to change because companies are still made of the human beings that you and I all are, right? Like, they're not bad people. They're just in a system that is made for a different purpose. So now the environmental and social awareness is growing over the last decade. So now they want to change as well, but they're caught in this system. So now what they're trying to do, and that's what's going to be fundamental, is that they actually have to ensure that the KPIs, so the key performance indicators that they're measuring their success on, are not only the financial ones, but that slowly but surely the CEO is measured also by the environmental performance. So how close are they to their net zero goal? Or how close are they to pay everyone in their value chain a living wage? Once we have those things as well, that's when business is going to be a positive contributor to the world. And then I'll end by saying this. Many CEOs come to me and say like, oh, but that's all really nice, but like, I can't become a social business from one day to another. What am I supposed to do? I'm also just a human being, right? And then what I say is, of course, change those KPIs for yourself and your top management. That's the first thing I say. The second thing I say is like, just try something concrete out. Think about what is a concrete problem in the world and what can your business competences do to solve that. So build a new business unit that is focused on solving a problem. So let me make an example. The first company that we set up together with a corporation about 15 years ago was with Danone, the yogurt company. They said, well, we produce yogurt. That doesn't really solve a real problem. And then we said, well, malnutrition is actually a real problem. So we then designed together with them a yogurt that solves the problem of malnutrition in kids until the age of 5 in Bangladesh, and started selling that. So that is for me a net positive business. Or another example,
just to get this right for our listeners, what they did is they added some stuff to the yogurt so that it became better for children.
Yes, nutrients and vitamins like zinc, iodine, those things that, kids don't have when they have malnutrition. And they produced that as a very cheap yogurt that people in Bangladesh could afford. So it was a really new product that Danone hadn't done before, but they did it because they had the capability of making this powerful yogurt. But nobody had asked them to do this before. No one in the research department had ever been asked, make the most nutritional yogurt. So when they did this was a whole new product, and they realized they could do that with their core business. Other companies are doing similar things. AXA, for example, has insurance products that are also targeted at the bottom of the pyramid, so at poor people, because they wanted to ensure that they're also being covered. Other companies do different things. So long story short, basically, I suggest to companies, try out new business models that are actually really focused on solving a problem that you currently do not address through what you know best, namely your core business. And then that will show you how over time, hopefully your entire business can go towards solving problems rather than just focusing on making money.
Let's switch right away to Lavazza and do the reality check. What about your KPIs? Great to have that.
Well, no, it's a very good inputs. When Saskia was talking, I was thinking about a very nice program that we set up 5 years ago, and probably this is kind of a social business we didn't know we were doing, because actually, we just deal with coffee since 125 years, and we just can do coffee. That's what we can do. But 5 years ago, we decided we started to reflect and dialogue with Save the Children, which is one of our main partners since 20 years already, on what could be a problem in the coffee world, a social problem to solve in the coffee world. And in general, in the world, youth unemployment is a problem. In Italy, we have a very big problem on youth unemployment, and in many other countries. So Lavazza has been opening training centers for baristas all over the world since 30 years. But basically, these training centers always served as hubs for our clients. You want to open a Lavazza bar, you open the bar, you come to our training centers, we teach you how to do a very good Lavazza coffee, and that's it. Together with Save the Children, we thought, why don't we teach the barista profession to young people not in employment? Because it's a very easy thing to do. I mean, doing a very good Italian espresso is not very easy, but you can learn it. So we set up this program. It started as a project, and now it's a program called A Cup of Learning. And we developed together with all the NGOs we work around the world, more than 50 NGOs, A Cup of Learning programs in 10 countries, involving now I think we are 300 people. And we are measuring where, first of all, who can reach the goal of getting the diploma, and how many of these people get a job in the coffee industry. And here comes again the partnerships, because we decided to involve, well, first of all, our colleagues, the trainers who train these people in need, and also our clients, big hotels or big bars, proposing them to hire these people in need. Many of them are in fragile situations. So it can be done. We can measure our social impacts also by doing this kind of program. This is just one example, but to come back to the KPI question, we have been issuing the sustainability report certified by a third-party audit on based on 55 KPIs on environmental, social, and governance criteria since 7 years. We are not listed in the stock exchange, so we are not obliged to do it. But the company, and again, the Lavazza family, because I think being a family company in this case, it helps a lot, decided to measure the company performance on environmental and social criteria by doing the report every year on an annual basis, third-party certified since 7 years. So it's a path, it's a journey, it's very, it's a passionate world, but you need to work on that every day, but it can be done.
Kim, I would try to get you back into the debate by asking you a question that's a rather big one. It's one of the questions that comes in from our listeners. The question is the capitalism still the right system for the global challenges that we are facing? I know it's a big one, but it kind of goes to the core of our debate. Within the system, are companies like Lavazza, are they actually able to shift to being better, more sustainable, more quicker climate neutral? And how can you actually push them? Or are they damned in the end in the system to kind of have some nice little niches, but the core business will still remain basically the same, just because the system is the way it is?
Who is this to? Should I answer? Is this to Veronica?
I thought Kim would answer it, but if you want to go first.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead. I just didn't know.
No, I think there's already a huge movement in the corporate sector and financial sector. There's pressure put on regulatory frameworks. There's pressure put on by consumers of goods and services that we access on an individual basis. There's pressure certainly put by investors and shareholders. So I think the world of the corporate sector is certainly shifting away from that traditional profit-driven model. I'm not dismissing the importance of profit-driven capitalistic approach, but I think more and more companies, especially with the ones with complex supply chain, are realizing that their business sustainability actually lies on environmental and social sustainability of the communities and geographic focuses that they're placed in. Because without the natural resources, their supply chain is at risk.
Without coffee beans, there will be no coffee any longer.
Exactly. So how do you create that sustainable supply chain is becoming a core of a corporate discussion rather than a CSR discussion, which was the case 10, 20 years ago. So I think there is a movement, and I'm a cautious optimist. So I do believe that we are on that pathway. And there, believe it or not, a lot of corporates genuinely want to do good in addition to their business. So I think we are on the right track, maybe a bit slow, but we need to really accelerate that progress.
Saskia?
And I think, so the fundamental question is capitalism the right model, yes or no? The answer is, it's definitely a flawed model, but we don't have a better one. I think that's a typical answer that you say about democracy as well. It's flawed, but we don't have a better one. And I think that's also when you're talking about alliances, is where, of course, also regulation comes in, right? To ensure that there's a level playing field between the different companies that are either doing something or not doing something. If regulation says, well, you have to do something, these are the minimum standards, well, then companies don't have a different way of doing it. But if some companies do something positive and the others don't, then these guys that are not doing anything are going to be much more profitable, and eventually they'll eat the good guys up, sort of thing. So that's why the level playing field created through proper regulation is the basis for this whole capitalist system to function in a better way. So in other words, my answer would be capitalism is the best that we have, but it does need to be tweaked. It does need to be changed and adapted. And I think that's where regulation comes in. So we actually create like what we always call a race to the top, rather than a race to the bottom where everyone just tries to, avoid paying people good and just exploiting the planet. So that's the change we need to make capitalism work.
Veronica, it's probably a bit odd to ask the representative of company whether we should get rid of capitalism, but what's your take anyway?
No, I agree with Saskia and Margaret. What I would add is that here partnerships come again as a concept. We need to work together also with governments and with institutions, namely European Union, for example, which is the most advanced in terms of regulation on sustainability issues. We need to work together to set up those level playing field that Saskia was mentioning, because everybody's keen on work on sustainability, institutions, NGOs, and companies. We want to do better for this planet because we need it for our supply chain, and everybody need it for himself or herself. But we need to work together to have the same level playing field. I totally agree with what they said.
And maybe just to add one additional thing, Petra, I mean, since you just mentioned the European Union, Veronica, I mean, we've all been discussing the whole topic of ESG, right? Environmental, social, and governance, which is now a topic that you read pretty much every day in the press. And now, indeed, as of next year, there will be regulation coming from the European Union that is actually mandatory to report on those standards. And there's just no way out. And while, of course, the whole ESG movement and the standards behind that is definitely not perfect, right? And a lot of companies are complaining, we have to do so much reporting, etc. It is the first step on the way that we will have a comparable basis where we can say, well, this is really the environmental footprint of that company. And that's, you know, what the industry standard is. And this is where, like, how bad that company is compared to the other in that industry. And the same on the social side. And if you have the reliable data that is actually driven by, you know, governmental regulation, then that's when we'll actually be able to see that change, because there's just no way out anymore.
If I could just add one thing, what I would suggest we should have in the group of partnerships is also universities, because what I see is growing, but it's still too little, is the competence on sustainability. Now we have a lot of masters popping up, a lot of courses popping up on sustainability, but it's basically something that is originating now. Even 10 years ago, when I graduated, there was nothing on sustainability. I just did one course, very, very strange thing about CSR, but we need also specialists on this, because otherwise you cannot change companies from within. You need professionals. So I would add university are very important in this group.
Definitely.
Great conversations have one downside. They run out, the time is running out too quickly, and we are kind of almost at the end of this debate. So what I would like to answer you with a quick answer is, if you had one wish, the people in my surrounding, they have the feeling that we are going into the right direction, but not quick enough, that we have to be quicker. If you had one wish to get the whole thing quicker, get the whole economy quicker into sustainability, and into the fight against climate change, what would it be? I know it's difficult, huh?
If I may start, I think the question of this panel discussion is the answer to that question, is the effective cooperation and partnerships. And just quickly, I think partnership is very easily said than done. And often we talk about public and private partnership. The interests are not aligned. The way that we work, the cultures are very different. So what we experience at Gold Standard is we actually spent a lot of time learning about different cultures. As a standard NGO, to work with a private equity in the East Coast of the US, we need to understand how they work, and they need to understand the language of impact and measurement, which are not the priority of respective parties. So I think it's we shouldn't underestimate the importance of that cultural alignment, understanding each other, learning from each other, and promoting that partnership so that it can be scaled and replicated across the world to achieve that greater ambition.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
I would say investments. We need to have the possibility to invest in green solutions and having incentives to do that. We need investments. We need money. Sorry, I am the corporate representative here, so I say we need money.
Good.
And I'll end on, I think we first need globally aligned standards around ES, particularly in G, and the International Sustainability Standard Setting Board is actually working on that right now. And then we need the boards of global corporations and the CEOs to set top-down KPIs that also include the social and the environmental dimensions rather than just the financial dimensions as it is currently. And I think then people in business will be creative and will come up with other solutions.
I actually don't want to talk cliché, but one of the things I experience is that when I ask women on mostly women panels to be brief, they are brief. So thank you so much for this panel. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for all your answers, and yeah, carry on, I would say.